All right, we're with Jeff Betty, who is running for re-election for the Republican County Chair. Thank you for your time this morning to be with us, and let's get started. Lyle-Ann, will you lead off, please?
Sure, thank you. Why do you want to continue as Republican County Chair?
Well, we've got two major issues in Tom Green County involving the Republican Party. The continued growth of the party is always the first issue that we always want to deal with, but in some ways, more importantly, it's maintaining unity in the face of no opposition. It's a real challenge for Tom Green County Republicans in that the opposition just simply doesn't show up election after election. So it's even more important that we as a group, as a Republican group, work together to determine who will represent us in each election. In other words, those running for constable, the two, will be our constable when the election is over. The challenges facing the party as we fight within ourselves to determine office holders are greater even than when you try to build the party. I think it's appropriate that someone has experience with the party in all aspects. I've been with the Republican Party in Tom Green now for most of 20 years, and I've seen us grow into this entity, and I'd like to see us in the future have our disagreements during the primary as far as who is the appropriate candidate and work through them, kind of like a family does. At Thanksgiving, you kind of squabble sometimes. Maybe you don't always like to be with everybody every moment, but it's still your family and you love them and you want to see them. I'd like the Republican Party around here to grow to that point where you can have disagreements about this person or that person, but that it doesn't affect the overall strength of the party. I think we're reaching that point, and I'd like to carry on and finish that. That's been my goal since I started with the party.
Well, you've kind of already touched on it, but what do you consider to be the most important function of the county chair?
Well, and that's the thing that I think is sometimes confusing because Republican Party chairs sometimes are asked to speak for the party based on what the platform of the party is and to answer questions on specific topics. It sometimes seems as if the Republican Party chair should be telling people what it is to be a Republican. And I don't really think that's necessary for the most part. I have my own beliefs about what it is to be a Republican and what is important about conservatism, but the most important role, in my opinion, is to manage the affairs of the party, to make sure that it's a welcoming presence for everyone who is a Republican, or even if they just think they're Republican and they're not real sure what that is yet, to manage the affairs as far as the business side of things. I don't think people realize we're a political organization that has money, that has a budget, that has a secretary and a treasurer, and we hold monthly meetings with an executive committee that decides how that money is going to be spent. We do fundraising, and then after the primary is over, then we support individual candidates. But the primary in some ways is the most important part of what we do because we actually run the election during the primary. So that's why I don't endorse candidates. That's why I stay out of it, even when I sometimes have very strong feelings about who the right candidate is, because it's my job to make sure that Republicans get the information they need, run a fair and clean election, make all Republican candidates look as good as they can look, and present the options to the electorate so that they can choose what it is to be a Republican. Because ultimately, this is a Democratic state party. The Republican Party is Democratic. In other words, the grassroots choose the candidates, choose the elected officers, but they also choose what it means to be Republican. So that's done through the convention process, and in that process I'm just one more vote that chooses what the platform says and what the rules say. So while I have I've been accused of being very strong-minded as far as my individual, I don't want to get into that discussion, because if I do, then I can't be a presence, a welcoming presence to someone because I've chosen a side. So one of the hardest parts about becoming chair was to set aside my own personal beliefs as far as a particular platform or issue, in order to be welcoming to anyone who walks in. I have to admit, the one issue I really can't set aside, though, is I am a full right-to-life person, and I just cannot accept pro-choice as a choice. It's not a choice. And so that's the one thing that I admit that I cannot set aside. And I if I have a flaw, it's that's just too personal an issue for me. So.
Good. So young people aren't getting involved in politics, as you know. Why do you feel this is happening, and how would you address this issue?
Some of it's natural, and that's the hardest, in some ways the hardest part to accept. When you're young, frankly, you're self-involved, you're busy finding your spouse, your partner, you're busy having kids and seeking your career and finding your place in the community. And so, and frankly, you've been educated in, on our current education system to a lot of things that are just plain wrong, either at the high school level or at the college level. And life has to help teach you that it's wrong. So I think one reason you see younger people on the other side of the political spectrum being involved in politics is they've been taught that in high school, they've been taught that in college, and they haven't learned yet that all that's wrong. That you can't take from one person and give to another. Wealth redistribution doesn't work. These are things that you can get taught in college and sounds beautiful, but life teaches you otherwise. Once you get married and you have children and you run a business and you work in the community, you realize that this is nonsense. But so for the Republican Party, the challenge is helping people to see that at a younger age. But frankly, our party has always been an older party because we are the party of conservatism, of fiscal responsibility. These aren't sexy concepts. Telling people that no, you can't have your cake and eat it too is not fun. But that's what the other party tells them all the time. And so it's easier to appeal to young people who see all the opportunities and all the possibilities in life. And I don't want to take that away from young people. I have 2 young people that I'm raising right now, and my daughter is a conservative person, but she's young and she thinks that you can save the environment and do all of this. It's not a zero-sum game in her mind, and that's okay. But our job, and my job especially as chair, I feel like, is to gather them in. When they start questioning this stuff that they've been fed as a young person, is to gather them in and say, you're right, you should have questions about what it is like to have a deficit of 27, depending on who you believe, 16 to 27 trillion dollars. You should be concerned about that. When the President of the United States tells us that we have a 5 or 6 or 7% unemployment rate, but 94 million people aren't working, you should question that. And so whatever it is the topic that gets a young person or a middle-aged person to question this stuff they've been told, then that's the thing I want to be available to tell them, okay, you're now welcome to the Republican Party. It's the old joke, I think we've all seen it on Facebook, the one that says a young person is asking about maybe it's school or it's fairness an issue, and then the older person puts to them the reality of life. Okay, you've done all the work, you got an A, but so-and-so is a really sweet girl and she should get an A too, right? And no, that's not fair. Welcome to the Republican Party. Well, that's exactly what we do, is we try to make sure that people understand whatever their topic is, whether it's right to life, whether it's fiscal responsibility, whether it's leadership just generally, foreign affairs, whatever the thing that brings them to the Republican Party, we want to be there to say, you're right. Your instincts about what's honest, what's fair, what's good for the country are correct. Here are the principles, here's the platform that goes to support that concept. And then what I've found is once we get them in the door and we show them just the plain logic of what we say about every issue, we keep them. And they grow as stronger Republicans and stronger conservatives. The problem is that dichotomy is when you're young, everything seems possible. And I guess it should. It's a good world when you're young. But the reality is everything is not possible. There are limits to what you can do with government. The simple fact is the government doesn't solve as many problems as the Democrat Party seems to think it will. And Obamacare, I mean, need I say more? Every time the government tries to solve a problem, it's a sledgehammer trying to kill a mosquito. It might kill the mosquito, but it's going to do some other damage in the process. And that's the problem we have with young folks. They're hopeful and happy, and no one would take that away from them. But the reality is that you have to be responsible, and that means discipline. And discipline's not sexy to young people.
Thank you.
Rusty had to step away, so I'll fill in. This isn't Rusty's voice. What plans do you have to develop the local Republican Party?
This is actually an ongoing thing for me. Obviously, I've been doing it for a couple of terms now, and actually, I started working with the party more like year 2000, so it's actually kind of a 16-year thing, working with the prior Republican Party chair and now as chair myself. The difficulty that sometimes happens is that strong-willed people who have a full understanding of what they think it is to be a Republican can sometimes, frankly, be abrasive, including me. We're all that way. The problem can be, though, that while we fight among ourselves as what it is to be conservative or what it is to be Republican, we're giving ammunition to the opposite side to pull us apart. Anybody that's watched the major news channels over the last 10 years knows that that's the game plan of the other side, is to find divisive issues bring those divisive issues up, and then let the Republican Party tear itself up as we discuss and debate those, because we debate those issues honestly in the Republican side, as opposed to the other side waiting for those on high to tell them what they should believe and then agreeing to it. So because of that hard-headedness, stubbornness, whatever you want to call it, we can sometimes seem like we don't agree. And the whole cold hard reality is that we agree completely on almost 90% of every issue. When I'm talking to a business-oriented Republican, or I'm talking to a Christian conservative type, or a right to life, it's always one issue where there's a nuance that they don't agree on. So my job has been, and my goal is to continue to be a fair, open place where all Republicans can come squabble with each other about those issues and work out what's the best solution. So as a Republican chair, I'm not supposed to be deciding what the right answer is, in my opinion. My job is to have a place where when you come to it, whether it's as an executive committee member in our meetings, in our monthly meetings, or whether you come to it to get signs or information about candidates, to be that source of information, to make it a welcoming place, and then to be in sometimes an executive committee or in the functions, to be kind of a referee and say, okay, now let's be nice to each other. You can still disagree, but let's be nice. Now, the other part that I sometimes have to do is to remind folks what the platform is. That's the part that can get a little uncomfortable occasionally, because while I'm trying to be pretty open to all interpretations of what it is to be Republican, fundamentally there's some things that you have to agree with or you're not a Republican. It's as simple as that. If you don't agree in protection of the Second Amendment rights of the people of this country, you really can't be a Republican. I mean, I'm sorry, but that's kind of the way it is. We all agree across the spectrum that the Second Amendment was not an accident. It was something we actually wanted, and that individuals have the right to bear arms to protect themselves. If you don't agree that the First Amendment protects our right to band together as a group to be Republicans and to be conservative, that it's not just a free speech issue, but it's also a freedom of religion and freedom of belief amendment, then you're not going to fit in well with the Republican Party. And so my job is to educate about that and hopefully not do it in an abrasive sort of way, so that a person who's trying to become a Republican can understand that that's where they need to be moving if they're not there already. It's like right to life. I'm sorry, but if you don't believe that that's a child at 5 months, then you're probably not going to be comfortable in the Republican Party, because most of us believe that it's a child at conception.
True. Lillian?
Who is responsible for verifying candidates' eligibility, such as, that they live in the proper district or precinct and have those educational requirements?
This can be very, very difficult because there's 2 levels of evaluation on this. The county chair cannot deny an application that on its face fits the requirements of a candidate. So if a person alleges that they live at a certain location, if it's a correct location, for example, a precinct has to be within precinct chair has to be within the precinct that they are filing in. But if it is on its face is an appropriate application, and by the way, the state party sends us out information on how to do an application evaluation. But once you've done that, once you've determined that a person has fit the applicant, you have to, by state law, you have to accept the application. So to give you an example, let's say, not in this county, but let's say in a county where someone is the county chair, a person came in and they are a Democrat. They have always been a Democrat. They've never been a Republican in their entire life, and they walk in and they file to be a Republican candidate for a certain office. If they are over 18 years of age, they do not have any other disabilities, they pay the appropriate fee, they fill out the application information that is mandatory and required, and they geographically live within the jurisdiction of the thing that they're running for, we have to accept their application. Even though we know they're a Democrat. That's the way the law requires it. Now, if there are things that prevent them from becoming that office, for example, a person is not a lawyer, but they're applying for a judge job, then that's an issue for the various entities that deal with Judicial Conduct Commission, for example, the Bar Association, the State Bar. There are other ways to prevent that person from taking office. They frankly can't qualify for office. But for example, I have 2 DA candidates and 2 district judge candidates, and I didn't check anybody's bar license. It's not on the application. It's not a required part of the process. So there's this ministerial position that I hold as county chair, and that's to take the money from the fee, make sure it goes into the correct account, spend it only for election funds, election expenses, That's a ministerial job, checking the application on its face that it complies. And then there's this other party job that I do as county chair to represent the Republican Party. And when you're talking election issues, it's just a ministerial function. I'm basically an employee in some ways, although unpaid. And I'm an employee of the Secretary of State's office and managing the election. It's sometimes unfortunate that it's that way, because when you know someone's not equipped for the job. But as you can understand, it's like access to the court. You want everybody to be able to try to do it. That's what's good, even if maybe they're not really qualified for the job. If you wanted to sue someone in court because you thought you had been harmed, you want to be able to at least get in the door. You don't want a functionary to say, you can't come here. You want to get in your courtroom and then have a judge explain the law to you if you didn't have a good claim, that kind of thing. So I think it's the right thing to do, but it's very uncomfortable sometimes when you have a Democrat file for a Republican office.
You kind of hit on my question a little bit already, so let's expound on it.
Okay.
We spend a lot of time and effort, money, personal time and effort. We're coming up on county convention, state convention. We spend a lot of effort developing a platform as a party. And as you say, that defines what our party is, okay? People coming into our party do not want to order a T-bone steak and get tofu.
Sure.
Okay? So that being said, we have elected officials, Republicans, that violate our principles of our platform repeatedly.
Sure.
Okay? So, as county chair, do you see or believe there should be some kind of mechanism for the party to inform party members of those violations when they happen?
Yeah, this is a tough question, and it may not seem like it is on its surface. I mean, obviously, compliance with the platform and being a Republican would seem to be kind of a threshold issue. And we've struggled with this over the years. Several times now there have been concepts or discussions about using tests or questionnaires to try to get. Well, and the problem is the same problem I had back when I was a prosecutor and wrote ordinances for the city of San Angelo. If you write an ordinance that says that you shouldn't do this, what happens is the people who comply with the ordinance generally, who are law-abiding citizens, will comply. But the folks that were causing you trouble in the first place, they're the people that don't comply with the law anyway, as a general rule. They don't care that I wrote an ordinance to prevent that action. Well, the same thing happens when you try to do questionnaires or you try to make people adhere to a platform. Those who don't have any personal integrity anyway have no trouble saying that they are a right to lifer or that they believe in a balanced budget. They have no trouble saying that because they're not. Their primary goal is to achieve a job, to get the position. Their primary goal is not to have integrity, personal integrity or professional integrity. And so when you try to make folks adhere by virtue of a questionnaire or an entrance exam, what you find yourself doing is making those who have genuine problems with their conscience about a particular issue, they're honest and they're punished for their honesty because of that. And those who have no trouble whatsoever promising you the world, they fly right through the process without any trouble. Now, if you think about it, what you want is the one who struggles, who has a genuine understanding of the issues and their conscience decides their issue. That's the guy you want, that's the lady you want to be comptroller, to be the legislator. Because you know that their conscience is going to drive their actions when they vote. But so the process is kind of counterintuitive. Now, there is a process in place. It's the greatest process that's ever been, and that's called election. Vote them out. Now, the Republican Party tried to do term limits back in the 90s as a mechanism to keep fresh people, fresh ideas coming in, and to increase the possibility of voting out incumbents with bad voting records, with bad records. What happened was we lost ground because the other side didn't bother with term limits at all. And since the government internally is run by seniority, in other words, inside Congress, inside the House here in Texas, the House of Representatives or Senate, it's the senior person that gets the chairmanships of the committees that has the most amount of power. That was actually hurting the party. So we had to, even though most of us still believe term limits would be healthy for this country, It would be better for this country. Until everybody's required to do it, it simply is counterproductive. So what I'm saying is that traditionally this country has given the incumbent an advantage. And an incumbent has a natural advantage because their name is known for having had the job. What I'd like to see the party do to assist, and I think this is what I've tried to do locally, which is to help all the candidates get their name out there. If they have an event, I don't care if they're the incumbent or a challenger, we put it on the Facebook page. If they'll send it to us, I'm amazed at how few will use us. But if they'll provide us with their brochures or their signs, we put them at the headquarters and say to the voter, we're not telling you whose sign to get. Here are your choices. Because it's our belief that if you open up the process and you increase the visibility of all the candidates, then the incumbents have to be more concerned about doing what they're supposed to do, what they told you they would do. That makes them better incumbents. And it makes it more likely that those who don't do what the platform says that they should be doing will be seen as having not done what they're supposed to. In Texas, we're a little better off because even the most moderate of our Republicans are much more conservative than a lot of the Republicans in our states. This problem is made even worse in states in the Northeast where the Republican Party is just not very strong, where it's not very democratic. And I will tell you as a side on this, by the way, the strength of the Republican Party in Texas is that it is a grassroots-oriented democratic process. If you get involved, you can be elected precinct chair, you can be elected county chair, you can go to the state convention and you can make decisions about who leads you and who is on the platform committee, who is deciding the rules. That doesn't exist in many, many states. At my last count, there were 12 states in which the delegates to the state convention were chosen pretty much by historical record. That guy's grandfather had been a delegate to the convention and now he is the obvious next choice. There was no openness to the party. Well, you can understand the Tea Party's frustration when they try to join a party where the doors are closed to them. So those states need to open up their party like we have. We're the most dynamic Republican Party in the country for a reason. Because when Christian conservatives wanted to join the Republican Party and change this country, yeah, there was internal discussion that Thanksgiving dinner fight a little bit, but now if you go to the convention, you will see, I can introduce you to them. Because a lot of them came at the same time I came to the party. And they're now leaders of the Republican Party. Homeschoolers, when they discovered that the Democrat Party was against school choice, when they were trying to just support the unions and the education system as it stood, homeschoolers discovered the Republican Party was for choice, for school choice, for the opportunity of a parent to decide what education their child received. When they discovered that, they came to the Republican Party in droves. And now Tim Lambert and his son are leaders within the Republican Party. We're the most dynamic and strongest Republican Party, not because we have discontent, but because we work through it and accommodate and build the party, the platform, based on the desires and needs of the actual voters. Now we've got to get those voters and help them be educated so they can make good choices between the status quo Republican who just wants to maintain the job and the Republican that understands that platform and why those principles are important. And that's the growth of the party. 20 years ago, we weren't having these discussions in this way. We were framing them as, we have Republicans, but they're not really Republicans. That was the discussion in Texas. They put an R next to their name, but they're not even the beginnings of a Republican. Now it's what flavor of Republican do we want? What strength of Republican? And that's where the growth is. Now we need to start exporting Texas. Unfortunately, because Texas is such a great state, we've enticed great conservatives all over the country. Even here in Tom Green County, many of the people I meet at the Tea Party or at my party are from Minnesota or Michigan or New York. Leslie Healy's running for precinct chair. She's originally from New York. Well, why do people come here? Why do conservatives come here? Because we're a great conservative state. Now we've got to figure out how to kick them back out and go back to their states and turn their states into Republican strongholds like Texas is. That's the great challenge of the Republican Party now.
That's awesome. Okay, it's being said our country is in a spiritual identity crisis from the invasion of Islam infiltrating our core belief system and foundational principles that are based upon God, the Bible, and our Constitution. Our president proclaims he's a Christian leader, but his fruit reveals he isn't seeking the God our country was founded upon. And the consequences we face now is that our nation stands to lose its Christian identity. So, the spiritual relationships of our elected leaders heavily affect our nation and which direction our nation is going to turn with this election. So with that in mind, how important is your leadership role to stand for God's righteousness and the Republican Party platform in developing a stronger godly influence within our own community?
But, and the trouble here is defining God. Even in my own household, I was raised Baptist, my wife was a Lutheran, and there's two flavors of God right there. The interesting thing is those who are truly spiritual, that understand the relationship between an individual and God, those folks, regardless of the flavor that they attend on Sunday, all have a common feeling. And I think that's what you're talking about when you say that we were based on a Christian ethic, a Judeo-Christian ethic. In my opinion, there's nothing inherently wrong with Islam. There's nothing inherently wrong. The problem is that at a certain time in its development, one portion of it, unfortunately now seemingly the dominant world portion of it, became a militant religion. And that's really ultimately the problem. And the longer we pretend, and our president pretends, that that's not the case, the more danger it is to this country. I have had friends that were members of the Muslim faith. I know them, and I actually studied in college a little bit because it seemed such a strange, what I saw people behaving like and what I thought it was so different. And I've been confirmed in my belief that most people who are of Muslim faith can work well in our community. They're just regular folks like we are. The problem is that other group is so militant and believes that anything they do is okay. And so what I'm hearing you say is, how do we protect that? And I don't think it's necessarily a Christian country, but a spiritual relationship between what is right and wrong and the way we decide what our government's laws are. And when we do that, we have to define the action of the entity that's doing it. And now this is true even of, for example, FLDS. When your faith tells you to commit crimes against children, against people, it doesn't matter that it's a faith-based decision, it's still wrong. And we have to understand that when your faith tells you that you can lie, cheat, steal, and do anything that you need to do to proclaim your faith or to push your faith, then we have to understand that we have to protect our society from those actions. Whether it's FLDS with children being married at the age of 12, or whether it's Islam who says that you should live according to the rules of society just long enough to bring a bomb into a church. We have to be militant in our response to these actions, and claiming that they are simply criminal is naive at best. And our current president seems to believe that we can deal with these issues as criminals. That's not the case. FLDS, is the Islamic militants, are organized and militant. And I use the term very clearly, militant, as in military, as in they raise money to buy weapons to harm us. And as long as we keep pretending that this is a question of faith, the president continues, or that we hate a faith, then we're denying the reality, which is that there is an organization that is only using faith as a cover or as an organizing principle, that is militantly at war with us. And that's why I say that it's important that we remember that while we are a Christian nation as our inception and throughout our history, it is the morality of that faith that was the key, that was created, that was infused into our Christian system, into our governmental system. The Constitution doesn't say in the First Amendment that Christianity will be protected, that it says that any religion, the belief that we have, will be protected by the Constitution. And that's why we've been so successful, because regardless of your definition of what it is to be a Christian, you had the right to pursue your faith as long as you didn't break the laws of this country. And those laws are based on our moral belief of what's right and wrong and what's good for our citizens. So that's why I say that when we start questioning the decisions of what is right and wrong and what our laws say, and when we start using religion as an excuse for violating the law, then it's time for those of us, especially in the Republican Party, to say, no, that's not the way this works. You will comply with the law, and your faith is not an excuse. So frankly, my problem with the Islamic militant incursion in this country over the last few years is that the government refuses to accept that it's actually an organized military activity against us. And we have the right to be angry We have the right to identify that people of Islamic faith are the ones doing it. And it's silly to pretend that Lou Brown, my vice chair, should be searched in the airport for weapons, because that's just silly. We know who it is that we should be looking for, and we should be looking for those people, not because of their faith, but because of what they are. They are organized, militant individuals that are trying to harm us. It's no coincidence that no successful terrorist attack has occurred in Texas. And yet in California, where guns are thought to be evil in and of themselves, 14 people died because there was no one there with a gun to protect them. I look forward to the day when somebody walks into a mall in the United States, in Texas, and pulls a gun out and says, because I think we will see that that shootout at the OK Corral will go 1-0. United States wins, terrorists lose.
One last question. How do you propose to bring the party together?
This is the hardest thing. This is the part that is the challenge that I feel like I've been working at since I got started with the party. When you get right down to it, we're gonna disagree. I have already said one of the most divisive topics in politics, and that is that I believe that at conception, whether you believe in biological terms or whether you believe in spiritual terms, when the man and the woman have come together, whether it's genetically or otherwise in spiritual terms, they've created a life. And from that moment on, we should think of it as, whether you want to think in terms of spirituality, that it's sacred as its creation, or whether you want to think in terms of biology, it now has an existence and will continue to grow if we allow it. That is one of the most divisive topics in American politics. Even in the Republican Party, there is a portion of the Republican Party that would disagree with what I just said, some quite violently. I'd be happy to argue with them in whatever tone they want to argue with. And I will bring my biology books, I will bring my spirituality to that argument. Having said that, when we have that argument, it is incumbent upon us to remember that we're on the same team. And that ultimately, while we may disagree when we decide on that, we have to have most of America on our team. Because when you get right down to it, you have to have 50% of the vote plus one person, or you can't get the person elected that will represent us. And that's the hard part, because ultimately we have to place our faith, as you asked your question about rhinos or about people who don't follow the platform, we have to place our faith and our vote and our belief in our government in the hands of men and women who run the government. I mean, we sometimes want to make it into this kind of almost, mythic kind of thing. These are just men and women going to a building in Austin and supposed to be doing what we tell them to do. And so when you get down to it, we're just fallen humans. All of us are flawed, and it's our job to hold their feet to the fire, those who run as Republicans, and make them be good Republicans. But ultimately, forgiveness matters. And again, I fall back on my faith, and I think you all do as well often. We are fallen. We are flawed individuals. And so when we have that discussion, and I run into a Republican who thinks that there's something involved in a choice at 5 months pregnancy, my job is to explain, to make them understand that a 5-month-old child, even if it's still in the womb, is a child and should be protected. And if they don't get it, if they're wrong, then my job is to forgive them for being wrong and to help them to understand and grow as a Republican and to support the Republican Party, even though I know they're wrong on that issue. And that's the understanding I try to build into everything I do, and I try to encourage in Republicans. It's okay to be wrong, but keep working to make them better Republicans. Because we need 50% plus one to win those elections, to get our people in the position of authority. And then we need to make sure those people that are in authority follow what we believe to be best for this country. And quite frankly, that's fiscal responsibility, that's deregulation whenever possible, that's government at the lowest level, not the highest level. That's not dictates from on high in Washington, D.C., but that's everything being at our level, because we have trouble getting our city council to do what we want them to do, and that's right here in our community where we know the members. What chance do we have to get Congress to do anything we think is right? Our country was founded on the basic principle of federalism, that government should be occurring at the lowest level with average citizens being interacted. And when the federal government becomes a behemoth that we can get to never listen to, there's nothing we can do to get them to hear us, then we've lost our way as Americans, as our way of life, and where our government is. And that fundamentally is the question for the next 20 years. is, do you believe that government should be at the lowest level where we have a chance to interact with it, or do you believe that we should place our faith in the Hillary Clintons and the Bernie Sanders of the world to dictate to us how we believe, what we think, what church we go to, and how we take care of our dogs? And if you think that the government should be telling us how to take care of our dogs and where we should place our trash cans, then welcome to the Democrat Party, because you're not a member of my party. My party knows that we can take care of our trash cans just all right by ourselves, and we don't need President Obama to tell us what kind of medical insurance we should have. We're more than capable of making those decisions for ourselves, and the federal government should stick to what it does moderately okay. Protect us from foreign enemies, and try to, as best they can, handle trade, international and interstate trade. Everything else, pretty much, they should stick their hands out of and let the states and the local governments handle, because they don't do a very good job, quite frankly.
All right. We would love for you to give us a closing statement, please.
The questions pretty much handled my closing statement for me. My passion has been keeping the doors of the Republican Party open to all who will hear what we have to say. I want to tell you a little story about how I got started. I walked into the Texas Tech College Republicans as a young 18-year-old, and there were 6 other people in the room. This is at a campus that has something like 28,000 students at it. This is in 1985. I took political science and history as an undergraduate. I graduated with double majors. I worked my way through college, so it took me 6 years. I worked full-time the whole time I was in college. Graduated without owing anybody a penny, never took a student loan. Because that's the way I was raised. Decided to go to law school because a professor told me, you're not suited to be a teacher yet, Jeff, you're too passionate on these issues, and so that's how I became a lawyer. Same thing, worked my way through law school. I found that the college Republicans were great people, but they were outnumbered, 90-1, 98-1, and so I kind of lost my way for a little while as far as the Republican Party and just focused on working, and getting through school. Got into law school and began going to the Lubbock County Republican Party. And when I walked in the door the first time at a county party, I was walking in the door with a group of Christian conservatives. Donald May, I can't remember his wife's name. I really should. I've only known him 20 years, but Dr. May is a person I've known for a long time. And we walked in, and quite frankly, there were a number of older Republicans in Lubbock that were downright rude. I didn't know Dr. May when we walked in. I just happened to walk in with him. But they were rude. They weren't welcoming. They weren't, this is the way things are done. They were, we're the Republican Party and you're these new people coming. Now, I didn't consider myself a Christian conservative, particularly a Christian. I'm a conservative, but here I was labeled just by being in an association. And I don't mind that label at all, but what I minded a lot was that feeling that I wasn't welcome, that I wasn't a good enough Republican, because I was 24 years old. How could I have been a good Republican? I was just getting started in my life. And so that feeling has stuck with me now for 30 years. That feeling. And so that's why when somebody walks into the headquarters, I don't care who they are. I don't care what they look like or what they think is important. I want to present them a welcoming face and say, this is what it is to be a Republican. You may not be there yet. That's okay. Tell me what you care about, because I'm going to tell you if you're right or wrong, if I think you're right. And almost always, the thing that brought them to the Republican Party is something one of our core beliefs. And so that's a building block. That's something we can grow their Republicanism and help them to develop it. And once they see the logic of why pro-choice is not a choice, why, whatever it is, once they see the logic of taxation without representation is wrong, whether it's done by a city council, as it's been done here in San Angelo, or whether it's done by the federal government. Once they see that and they come to the Republican Party, then their mind is open to the rest of what it is to be a Republican. That the Second Amendment wasn't a discretionary act or an oopsie or it meant muskets. Come on. It meant that an armed populace is a populace that controls its destiny. Hitler, first thing he did was disarm the public. Why? Because he knew that if he could disarm them, he could control them. Same thing here. So once I get that core, that first issue with the Republican, once I get them talking, even if it's just a one-issue Republican, I know that if I'm welcoming and I introduce them to fellow Republicans like them that maybe had that first question, sometimes quite old. I mean, Democrats change their stripes at the age of 60 sometimes, and we love it when they do, because they're some of our best believers and our strongest believers. And so when that happens, when I get them in the door, then I feel like it's my job to sell them on the party, to make them understand the logic of our positions, and that our positions are based on faith and principle. That those principles were set down primarily by the founding fathers and reestablished by Abraham Lincoln and the Republican Party. I try to remind them that the Republican Party is the party that ended slavery. The Republican Party is the party that passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and we are the party that has always protected the individual against the collective, and we're going to continue to be that party. So I think my time is up. I see some heads turning to the window. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to y'all, and I hope y'all will continue to work with the party. Y'all are good Republicans, and I'm glad you're doing the work.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. We really do appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.